session number 4. Again, I'm still waiting, going live. Anything said will be broadcast, not yet. Live now. Hello, everybody. Welcome to the FRSecure 2022 CISSP Mentor Program, session number 4. I am your host, Ron Werner. I'm going to pause and just for one moment, wait for more people to join. While you are waiting for me to start and dive into domain number 2, this is a good opportunity. Pull out your book, your study guides, your notes, and let's get ready to rock and roll. Good to see everyone. Say hi in chat. I see a lot of you are saying hello in chat. It's good to see you all back. Before I start, I got to start with a 1980s reference. He's back. Oh, my voice cracked. Anyone remember where that came from? The 1980s movie. They're back. Poltergeist. Yes, geek humor. Okay, now we can get started. Give a few moments for people to join the room. And again, welcome everybody. Hi, everyone saying hi in chat. Hard for me to multitask, type in chat, talk, read, all of that fun stuff. A quick housekeeping reminder regarding the class here. First of all, we are live streaming. Many of you, though, I know watch this via the video recording, which is cool. The chat, keep it upbeat. Everyone usually is really cool about the chat, so no worries there. Ask questions if you have a question. Now, if you ask a question and it scrolls off and no one answered your question and you get sad, re-ask the question. We just miss things. We have some wonderful moderators. Sometimes we'll miss something. Or you can go to the Slack channel. Slack channel is a lot calmer and you can ask questions there as well. I see Ted has a dad joke, and I noticed there's probably going to be a little bit of a lag between the video and what I'm seeing on chat. I'll come up with a dad joke here momentarily. Other quick reminder, do not share copywritten material. Nothing controversial. This is the agenda for tonight. Going through reminders, the welcome. Again, if you have questions, and then we're covering domain 2. In case you forgot, I'm Ron Werner. I have my own cyber consulting company, Cyber AAA. I also teach for a university called Bellevue University. You can look me up if you are so bold. Go ahead and click on the QR code. Since this is the second session I am teaching, you can go back and watch the session 2 video to learn a little bit more about me, or feel free, look me up, use my link tree to see all of my social media. Go to my LinkedIn. If you're so bold, click on the QR code. They can be dangerous. Or you can watch my TED Talk, Hackers Wanted. Okay, enough self-promotion. Study tips. Use these to help you as you're digesting this material. Why I like the format of the FRSecure Mentor Program, gives you time to really dig deep into this material. Occasionally, if you just try to learn everything in the book, and this is one of the CISSP books that I have, all 700, 800 pages, it's a lot for 1 week. So it's digesting over time. So study small amounts. Someone mentioned in Slack, I'm really busy. I don't have too much time to study. What do I do? Take 10, 15 minutes during a break. Little small increments. Find a little few pages to study. Particularly take some practice tests. Find your weak areas. If you're reading a page and you realize you're comfortable in it, then move on. However, look for the little nuances. Sometimes we get too comfortable with material, and that's what can trip up people on the exam. So just reading, hello again, great to see everybody. Keep up the good jokes in the chat. I love the humor. Just has to be safe for work is all we ask. PG-13 or nicer. Other study tips. Ooh, I like that. Take naps after a heavy topic. Oh wait, no, not now. Write things down. Have a pen. Take notes, however you like to take notes. Take your own notes. Ask questions or share something you've learned through the Slack channel. That's what it's there for. If you find other students you're connecting with, maybe set up your own small study group. Nothing wrong with that. And then get fresh air, get sunshine. If you, I'm going to go back. If you have any study tips, if you're live with me now, put it in the YouTube chat. If you're watching through video, put it on the Slack channel or write them down for yourself. What are your top 3 study tips? I want to know. You might think of something I haven't thought of. So top 3 study tips, go. And if you're watching this on the video, write them down, share them in Slack. Last Wednesday, Ryan did a fantastic job of finishing domain 1. What we've realized with this textbook, with the study guide we are using for this class is that it's much different than previous versions. Not that I understand why they're doing it. So we've been putting in a lot of additional effort to make sure you have the most current material. Shout out to Ryan for all the work he's been doing, and of course, Evan Francine and the rest of the FRSecure crew. It does go very fast. We cover a lot of material. I'm covering all of domain 2 tonight in the next 1 hour, 54 minutes, I hope. Find time to study. I'll be covering and doing a quick review of domain 1. This is what I want to know. Have you read domain 2? Before you, if you're watching this video recorded and you have not read domain 2, press pause, time out, go get your book and at least browse through all of domain 2. Be familiar with it before I share my knowledge about it. This way you can take what I am saying and what you have learned and digest it for you. If you're here with me live, I hope you read domain 2 already, or again, quickly take it out, browse through it. Again, if you have questions, put them in the chat. Some of the most common questions about the Slack channel, check your email. The email that you receive each day of class does have the slides for that day, a link, of course, to this YouTube, and then the a link to the Slack channel, and sometimes additional resources. Other questions, the slides, again, we share them through email. We do publish the slides through Creative Commons. We ask, though, rather than you directly sharing the slides with someone, direct them to this course, get them involved. Of course, you can share the slides as much as you want, but really the value is not just having a slide deck. It's being able to share this experience. Another question that is often asked, quiz banks. What is the best quiz bank? Top tip, keep taking practice exams. Take lots of practice tests. Go through a lot of questions. That way you become familiar with the format, comfortable with how to answer questions. If you have a good CISSP study bank, list of test questions that you use, put it in the chat here on YouTube, or almost better yet, share them on Slack. We've had numerous people on Slack ask about test banks. So share the ones you are using. Someone else may find it very valuable. What I love about this community is it really is a collective effort. Many of you are asking great questions, and then many of you are answering them, because I don't have all the answers, neither does Evan or Ryan or Christoph, or Brian, Believe it or not, we don't. We do, though. And I love the collective and collaboration, kind of like the Borg. So we are the CISSP Borg. Ooh, that'd be fun. Run with that, Evan and Ryan. Anyway, if you have other resources, please share them, particularly in Slack. This is the book. I'm checking chat real quick. Just to remind folks, please do not share electronic versions of the book. The authors spent a lot of time developing this. Ooh. Spoiler alert, spoiler alert. I hear a rumor that one of the authors is going to be joining this class in May. Maybe just a rumor, could be true, so stay tuned for more information. This is the book we're using. Make sure you get a copy. All right, I see some of you are putting dad jokes in the chat. I love it. I'm just reading through, seeing if there's anything in chat I need to address. Nope, everything's looking good. Ready for a dad joke. And if you have the slides, you already know the answer. So go ahead and spoiler, put the answers in the slides, in the chat, sorry. What type of bear is the most condescending? What type of bear is the most condescending? A panda. Sorry. Okay. Dumb dad joke out of the way. And now on to our regularly scheduled program. Before I dive into domain 2, let me talk about domain 1. All of the domains will intermingle. I'm going to mention this again in a moment. Don't think just because you're done with a domain that you can take it and put it out of your mind. Cybersecurity is not done sequentially. Cybersecurity is all about string theory. Everything is interconnected, particularly in the world of cybersecurity. You don't only do access control. It's always tied to identity, auditing, and then what type of access control. So take some time to go through and review previous domains as we work through this course. So when people are asking questions about the book, Ryan or someone from FRSecure, if you could answer. And again, if you're not getting your question answered through the live chat, you can do it on Slack. Domain 1, what did it cover? Security and risk management. A lot of basic security concepts. Who can be the first to put in chat, what is CIA when it comes to security? Not the US agency. So let's review a little bit of domain 1. First, professional ethics. Ethics go a long way. Paramount to much of what we do, not just go a long way. If we don't have our integrity, we are not trustworthy as cybersecurity professionals. Okay, enough said. General security concepts. CIA, confidentiality, integrity, availability, basic. And then what was DAD? D-A-D. Ooh, if you're live with me here, put it in chat. DAD as a corollary to CIA. What is security governance? Governing, setting the rules and then enforcing those rules, usually done through business leaders. And then compliance. I often work with organizations, companies. They have a security policy, but they never enforce it. Why have it written if you're not doing it? So you need to enforce the compliance. Compliance is usually through IT audit. How much legal do you need to know for CISSP? There was actually a question in Slack I noticed just before we started this class today about, I'm trying to recall what it was. I don't have Slack up. Anyway, the preponderance of evidence, something along those lines, where the book might be slightly wrong. Just be aware, you're not expected to be an attorney However, as a cyber professional, I spend a lot of time understanding laws, regulations. Having that base of understanding is what ISC Squared is looking for CISSP, as well as other certification exams. And thank you for those who put disclosure, altered, and destruction in chat, DAD. Other things, investigative types, went through that. The last bullet on this slide, security policy, standards, procedures, guidelines. Know the difference between them. Almost every organization I evaluate, they have a problem with their policy. Very rarely do I see orgs get policies correct. They'll put something like, try not to eat around your workstation in their policy. Try not to eat is a guideline. How do you enforce it? Are you willing to fire someone over that? That's the difference. A policy are the rules that have to be followed. A guideline, try to follow. Standards tend to be more technical. Procedures are more of the step-by-step how-to. I take a moment to repeat some of these because it's that important that you understand it. Not only for a certification exam like CISSP, also as a cyber professional. Also from domain 1, personnel security policies. The people side of security, HR. Often as a cybersecurity professional, I've had to work with human resources. For example, when employees went to websites they shouldn't, and they downloaded things from the internet that they shouldn't and put it on a work computer. I then had to work with human resources on termination. Business continuity. Ryan spent a good chunk of time talking about business continuity as a part of cyber resilience. So take some time. Even if the book talks only about it for, say, a paragraph or a page or two, I'll tell you a challenge with the book. The book, it does not have everything. Plus, the book will be wrong. Every book. It's almost impossible to have it be 100% right. Use the book as a jumping off point to learn more. Could you be asked a question on your certification exam that was not in the book? Yes. Is it fair game? Yes. Perhaps the authors of the book inferred it, implied it, but didn't go into detail, hoping the students would study. Because there's only so much. If the book was going to be complete, it would be probably closer to 2,000 pages. Risk management. Ooh, put in chat. Qualitative risk management contains two primary elements. What are they? What are the two primary qualitative elements? Likelihood or probability and impact. Keep these in mind. And then the difference between qualitative, quantitative risk management. That's a whole 2-hour lecture right there on that. Threat modeling, understanding threat vectors, threat actors. Threat vectors, how are they going to enter your system? Threat actors, who or what could cause harm to your organization. Supply chain. Do you know where your stuff is coming from? Can you say log4j? Yeah, that's direct supply chain challenges we see. Supply chain is a hot topic of 2022, I've heard, because so many organizations are now dependent on others. And then lastly, security awareness. Keep spreading the word. Each of you are security evangelists. Please share what you're learning with others. That's part of the reason why we do this, is we want this knowledge out there. Okay, so let's take a practice. Thank you for all for putting your answers to my question in the chat. And I noticed there's probably about a 10-second lag from when I say something to when you actually see it on YouTube. It's kind of funny. I wonder if they have one of those beeper if I say a naughty word. I'm not going to test that. Okay, let's take a practice test question. Which of the following is not included in a standard risk assessment? Put your answer in chat. Not included in a standard risk assessment. And I see many of you are answering. So now I will move forward. Penetration test. And you might go, why penetration test, Ron? Well, first of all, least correct. You could say, well, we do penetration tests as part of a risk. Not always. I often perform a risk assessment without a penetration test. Penetration test is later on in the cycle to see how vulnerable you are, the path of vulnerability, that threat vector, if you will. So it's the least correct answer, and it's often included with other type of risk assessments. So these are similar to the type of questions. I've simplified these questions, though. Quite often, the questions you'll see with CISSP and other certification exams are going to be a lot longer. They'll give you a scenario. So being able to quickly read those scenarios. Okay, let me give you another question. And if you have questions about my practice questions, you can put them in the chat, catch us offline, use the Slack channel to ask as well. This type of document is mandatory and must be followed throughout an organization. Look for keywords as you are answering this. This type of document, mandatory and must be followed throughout. The answer is information security policy. So Nist framework, only if you're part of the US federal government is Nist framework mandatory. But we were implying through this question, again, the best answer. Cloud benchmarks, a benchmark, it's not a policy. Wi-Fi use guidelines, again, a guideline is not a policy. You don't have to follow it. So policies are mandatory, the others are discretionary. If you're not familiar or if you're having problems struggling with these questions, go back and review domain 1. So just looking through chat, thank you all for participating, those who are live. And hopefully if you're watching this through the video, you're taking this time to read through. Moving forward to domain 2, finally, asset security. You can see this is actually from the book, looking at assets. So think about it. How do you define asset? What is an asset? Well, tangible or intangible. So that means something I touch. My water bottle is a tangible asset I can't live without. Intangible could be data, software, could be hardware, software, networks, systems. That definition, though, is important. Oh, you're welcome. Yes, I try to provide the explanations as well, stating in the chat. So I saw someone put a question in the chat. Deja vu all over again. If you recall, I had this same comment about domain 1. There are a lot of topics that intermingle within each of the domains we're learning. So we will help you to make it be clear. I do want to share this study tip. So I'm a computer scientist. That's my background. I think very sequentially. So when I read a book, I read chapter 1, then chapter 2, then chapter 3, and read page order. You don't have to do this here. You will see in today's class, the topics often jump around. We'll talk about it once, like mention asset inventory near the start of class, and then jump later on and talk about it again. So what I would recommend you do as you're reading through the textbook is be ready to jump around. Don't feel like you have to study it each page in and of, sequentially. Go find the index, use the index to see where else in the book that topic is discussed. So study tip, don't read the books sequentially. There's another reason why I point that out. This is from the CISSP exam overview from ISC squared. You will see tonight's topic is 10% of the exam. This is misleading, I need to tell you. Often when the test writers, they'll write the questions, they don't write them only to a specific domain. You will often see a question, one question that'll cover multiple domains. It's where it can be somewhat challenging to understand, well, I'm weak in this domain, which domain, how do I study? You really do need to know all of them and understand how they commingle. So that's my caution here. Overlap between domains. So don't think you learn security and risk management. I'm done. Don't need to read that. Guess what? You do. Same thing tonight's asset security will reference domain 1, it references domain 3, and it references domain 7. Just be aware. So approximate, these are approximate numbers. Checking chat, seeing here. Basically, yeah, I'm seeing Eric noted failing domain 1 fails the entire test. Pretty much, because those are the fundamental concepts. Domain 2 from the study guide. To summarize, you got to know what you got to keep it safe, to keep it secure, and how important it is. We'll talk about all of this throughout tonight's class. These are the topics from the study guide, so you can become familiar with it. We'll talk about identifying, classifying information, establishing, handling, provision, how do you provision those resources, the data lifecycle. Actually, I have a better slide for that. So let's talk about it. Throughout tonight's class, you will see page numbers. The page numbers refer to the PDF version of the book. That is, whoa, sorry, wrong one. I'm pulling up my copy of the book. So the page numbers refer to the PDF version of the book. I don't have a hard copy of the book. They got all sold out for some reason. Y'all are awesome. Anyway, if you have a hard copy of the book and can share the page numbers, put the page numbers in chat. I'd be really grateful, and so would other people. Again, this is why I like this as a big study group. We're helping out each other. So you see the page numbers covers approximately about 75 pages. Let's talk about tonight's topics. And these are the large topic areas with many subtopics throughout each. I already mentioned identifying, classifying information and assets. We'll explain what that is, how to handle those assets and information. Provision, how to give out, how to share resources. Data lifecycle. Data as opposed to other assets. I'm going to mention this a few times. And by the way, if I repeat something, it's normally on purpose because I want to make sure it's sticking. Something I learned from marketing. You have to hear things 7 times for it to stick. So one thing I'm going to be saying again multiple times. Assets and data are very similar, but they are often handled slightly differently. Okay. And I'll bring this up again momentarily when we go in a little more detail about the data lifecycle versus the asset lifecycle. Appropriate Love the word appropriate. Who determines appropriate? It's a business decision, appropriateness. Just to let you know. So ensure asset retention. So how do you maintain, retain those assets? And then lastly, those security controls. How do you determine which controls to use? Do you need to follow every security control within your environment? The answer is most likely no, unless you are in a military facility. And if you are, we don't need to know. That's top secret, classified, don't tell us. Most people here tonight, I would say probably 99.5% of you are not in a military top secret facility. So that means you don't need to follow all of the controls. Okay, so you don't need to follow all of the controls. So which ones do you need to follow? We'll answer that. From a couple of weeks ago, this domain, a little all over the place, out of order. Yeah, things are intermingled. So deja vu all over again. Yogi Berra. Let's begin to dive in to domain 2, talking about how to identify and classify information and assets. Consider the CIA when you're thinking about assets. And I'm going to give you an example here momentarily. This is from the book where we'll talk about best practices, policies, your methods to assure confidentiality, integrity, availability of organizational assets. Keep this in your mind. We're coming back to it momentarily. Now, before we dive into how should we identify and classify information and assets, I want to provide some supplemental resources, which were talked about previously, and I'm going to talk about them again later in this broadcast. First, and I'm pausing here for a moment. If you are, well, whether you're live or watching over video, take a moment, go to csrc.nist.gov. It's the Computer Security Resources Center. And I have it up here somewhere. There we go. I can make it a little bigger for you. This is from the National Institute of Standards and Technology. Even if you're in another country, use this as a resource. I talk to people throughout the globe, and many other countries are now relying on National Institute of Standards and Technology. I've been using CSRC for many a moon. Awesome free resource. Use this to supplement what you are learning in this class, because we will be referring to this throughout not only tonight's class, but probably most weeks. Did I mention cyber supply chain risk management earlier? Yeah, they have a document on it. DevSecOps, ooh, buzzword. How to measure information security if you're in industrial control systems, operational technology. Ooh, so many good resources, so little time. Anyway, use CSRC as a resource. Another that I'll bring up later, the cybersecurity framework, currently version 1.1, which was from September of 2018, I believe, a few years old now. Nist is updating the cybersecurity framework literally as I speak. We use this throughout information security. So more about all of this coming up, so stay tuned. Another resource I want to provide for you, not mentioned in the book. I use this frequently as a cybersecurity practitioner, is the Center for Internet Security. Center for Internet Security, CISSecurity.org. I'm pausing, taking a breath to give you a moment to go there. Open it up in a new tab. Go look at it. Again, another resource that will help you as you are studying. Keep in mind, something that many certification exams are trying to do is make it more practical. Using CSRC, using the Center for Internet Security makes what you are learning in the book very practical. From the Center for Internet Security, you will see there are multiple areas to the website. The two I want to really point out are their controls. The controls are the top 18 things to do to be reasonably cyber safe. So if you have an organization that's trying to grow their cybersecurity program, pull up the Center for Internet Security Controls. And then the other resource, I'm sure will be discussed later in the class, are the benchmarks. These are control guides for applications, operating systems, devices, almost you name it. So if you're wondering, how do I lock down Windows 10, Windows 11, network, whether it's Cisco, Palo Alto, or you name it, or other types of applications, Oracle database, MS SQL, they have benchmark guides. Use this as another resource. Now, here's my question why I wanted to bring this up. What do the Center for Internet Security and the Nist cybersecurity framework have in common? What does the Center for Internet Security Top 18 and Nist cybersecurity framework have in common? They both start the same way: inventory, asset management. So that must mean it's pretty important. If you have two different references that start with the same thing, that kind of tells me that's where we need to start. But Ron, doing inventory is boring. We want to get to the hacking, cybersecurity, fun stuff. Did I mention you got to know what you got to keep it safe? Okay, let's dive right in. From the Nist cybersecurity framework, again, I'll talk a little bit about it. This is used worldwide. They have a whole function. So the top row are called functions. The functions are identify, protect, detect, respond, recover. Identify is everything you do at the start. You can see asset management, that's this chapter. To dive in a little bit deeper into the cybersecurity framework, this is actually from a spreadsheet you can get from Nist that goes into the identify function asset management category. And you can see right off the bat, physical devices inventoried, software applications inventoried, mapping data flows. Do you know who your external communications and systems are? Cloud, right there. So that's why I pointed out, use the cybersecurity framework to extend your study. And if you have an experience with the Nist cybersecurity framework, please share it in chat. Are the CIS benchmarks the same as the Desa Stig benchmarks? I see this question in chat. I'm going to answer it. No, they are not. There very well could be some overlap. The DoD Stigs, and if someone can throw the link in chat, I almost have it memorized, but my brain isn't going there. There are classified versions. So Stig, Security Technical Implementation Guides. Security Technical Implementation Guides can also be used to secure an infrastructure. They are different than the CIS benchmarks, but there'll often be a lot of overlap. Great question. Love that question in chat. Also, speaking about the Center for Internet Security, here are those top 18. Very top. Ooh, deja vu, all over again, all over again, all over again. Inventory of hardware, assets, software, data. Nist and Center for Internet Security start the same. Could be important. There are, thank you for throwing the Stig link in chat. I just noticed. I often will reference the security technical implementation guides. So it's another resource to keep handy. Many other regulations involving asset security. This is where I put the page numbers in the book. Do you need to memorize the contents of all of these? No, but there could be a reference as part of an examination question. I would become familiar with many of these. Later on, I'll also talk about Federal Information Processing Standards 199 and 200, the UK Official Secrets Act, GDPR. GDPR affects almost everyone around the globe today, because if you're touching anything in Europe, it has to deal with any type of personally identifiable information, you have to think about being compliant. You'll notice in the slide deck, I'm just going to quickly mention these two resources. I'm not going to go here. I have other classes where I talk about data privacy, or privacy if you're in the UK. Anyway, these are as a website that'll take you to privacy laws. There are literally hundreds of potential laws associated with asset management, data privacy, data breach notification. This website will take you there to look at some of them. This isn't even a complete list. If you are in the United States, IAPP, International Association of Privacy Professionals, I believe is what IAPP stands for. If you want to learn more about privacy, they are the ones to go to. This is their website to learn more just about laws here in the United States. It gets very confusing. A friend of mine once listed all of the privacy, compliance, and security laws on one slide. She had to use 8-point font, and there were like 250 laws. Just be familiar with some of them. Now let's talk about how to identify, classify. You need this to mature a security program. If you have some things that are not being managed well, they could be threat vectors. They could be potential risks for your entire organization. You want to be able to locate and categorize those assets and determine their value. Value, so something may or may not be in the book, I forget, but there's the absolute value and utility value. So if you look, I'm holding up a pen. What's the value of this pen? If you're an attorney, you'll say it depends, because that's really the answer. How much does it cost for me to buy a pen? Well, this is a really nice pen I got for free. So it's probably maybe $3 US. But what if I lose this pen? I don't have a pen to write with now. Does someone have a pen? I really need one. Give you $10 for it. That's utility value. Notice the difference. Same thing with an automobile. You don't have a car to drive. You may be willing to spend a lot more. So utility value, that's part of the categorization of assets. Because then dependent on how you categorize, you'll have a different security approach. Question: should you secure everything in your organization the same way? Does everything have to have the exact same level of security within your organization? The answer is no. I'm trying to rack my brain for exceptions. Like my home, I secure some things a lot more than others within my home, depending on their value and utility. My security approach is different. This is why what Ryan briefly mentioned in the last session about risk management is so important, because you assess risk to determine what security approach you take. So thank you for all your comments again in chat. From the book, and I'm going to read this quote. Having a current and complete inventory is the absolute bedrock for implementing and monitoring technical security controls. I emphasize that mainly because so many organizations struggle with having an accurate and complete inventory. They may have it for physical assets. Usually physical assets are easier because you can touch it. Software, somewhat easier because you can run scans. How about data? Do you know where your data is? Your crown jewels, your most sensitive data? Are you sure you know where all of your sensitive data may be? It's a big struggle. We'll cover that later on. Asset inventory. So what should go into your asset inventory? Well, what it is. Servers, equipment, devices, laptops, desktops, tablets, phones should be inventoried. Software tend to be applications. Could be software, could be firmware though. Data tends to be the hardest. I had a fleeting thought with this. Ooh, let me ask you a question. Do you capture all, A-L-L, all assets? What do you think? All. I'll sometimes have a student do that to me. Ooh, your inventory needs to have everything. I'm like, no, it doesn't. I do have another pen, by the way. I always keep at least 3 pens by me. This pen, it's an asset. Do I need it in my asset inventory? No, because I got 100 pens. How about, I'm trying to hold up my mouse. Not going to work. Here, my keyboard. Do I need to have an asset inventory of a keyboard? Maybe. It depends on your organization. I do know some that will put an asset tag on a keyboard, but think about it. How much is this keyboard worth? This is actually kind of nice one. I think I spent like 40 bucks on it, but anyway. But I have like 3 other spare keyboards in my closet, so something to consider. So what it is, where is it? The location, physically or virtually. Okay. Software, is it cloud-based or is it downloaded? Just looking at chat momentarily. So knowing where and then putting that where in your asset inventory, both physical, logical, virtual location. This study guide does not go into any detail on network diagrams and data maps. I encourage you. I'm going to be ahead of you for a moment in chat. I'm going to wait for a moment. So learn, I'm putting it in chat. Learn about network maps and data, network diagrams and network maps. Network or data maps are sometimes also known as data flow diagrams. If you are ever audited, the auditor will often ask, I'd like to see a network diagram showing your infrastructure. Do you have one that's current? I see many organizations that then struggle to show their particular environment. A data map shows where and how the data flows. If I were creating a CISSP question for the exam, I would probably have one on data mapping because it's so fundamental to see where data leakage could occur. Oh, let's see, where else am I? And then as part of your asset inventory, who is responsible for it? Stay tuned for that thought. We'll talk about roles and responsibilities in a little bit. Who is responsible? from a business side, cybersecurity, and information technology side. More about this later. Did I mention the book sometimes jumps? Yes. Later in tonight's class, I'll refer to this again, but we won't go through it in as much detail. Now, before we talk about data classification, and I was checking, how do you validate your data mapping? Ooh, I want to answer that question before I go on. Good question. You literally find the breadcrumbs. It would be like if I gave you a map, a physical map showing physical location. Well, how do you know the map is accurate? You drive. You actually confirm the different points on the map. That's how I confirm a data map, show where that data actually flows. I'll talk to the administrators who are responsible for those assets to confirm, is that where the data flows? And sometimes if you're working with an auditor, they want actual audit evidence about data flows. It's a really good question. And believe it or not, it does apply to tonight's topic about asset management. When we talk about data leakage or data loss, because I see this as a common challenge for organizations dealing with personally identifiable information, PII, or usually cardholder data is not as much of a problem, but it could be. I have seen it. Catch me offline for my cardholder data PCI story. Anyway, data lifecycle. This actually will come up a little later in the book, but I couldn't talk about how do you classify data without first talking about the data lifecycle. Note, data lifecycle is different than the asset lifecycle. So data, it's a piece of information. So think about the definition of data. Okay, it's just usually has value in and of itself. Information is actually data that has been processed as opposed to intelligence that has an action against it. Anyway, where do you collect the data? We'll talk about that later on. How is data stored, used, shared, retained, destroyed? I do recommend memorizing the data lifecycle. Not that hard. Just not that I think there's going to be a question, and I really don't think there'll be a question, what is the fourth step in the data lifecycle? ISC² does not ask trivial questions like that, which I'm very thankful for. But the relative. Now, keep in mind, this is shown as a circle. You can, after you collect it, use it as you are storing it or share it. So think about how these intermingle. So just want you to be familiar with this. Before we talk about data classification, though, I wanted to point out one more Nist reference. And actually, I'm going to stick here for a second because I want to ask this in chat as well. Nist has the cybersecurity framework, risk management framework, privacy framework. Okay, they are 3 different frameworks. Ryan talked about the risk management framework. It's basically how to certify information systems. Cybersecurity framework is about protecting systems. And then the privacy framework is about how do we manage people's identifiable information, personal information? How do you manage sensitive data? So this is the question I'm going to ask in chat. And if you notice, I like to put things in chat too. I just have to be careful because of the lag. What's the difference between security and privacy? Put your answers in chat. And if you're watching on the video, think of your own answer before I tell you. The difference between security and privacy. The way I learned it and the way I see it, because they intermingle quite a bit. Security is more about protecting systems. Privacy is more about protecting data, particularly people's data. Security is more business to business focused. Privacy is more business to consumer. So B2B is security, B2C, business to consumer, is privacy. If you have other ways of seeing the difference, but they definitely overlap, two sides of the same coin. So knowing that, you need to know as a professional. And we're seeing a lot of the coming together of security and privacy. From the Nist privacy framework, you can see it also starts with identifying the -P, meaning privacy, governing, controlling, communicating about privacy, protecting. And then it actually does finish with the last categories and functions from the cybersecurity framework in terms of detect, respond, recover. So use the Nist privacy framework as you're learning this as well. Okay, and now back to our regularly scheduled program on data classification. Need for data privacy. You're grouping the data based on sensitivity, criticality, value. So in a moment, I'll show you examples of personally identifiable information. That's not the only type. An organization's financial data is not PII, but it could be critical. Their financial, so it's a publicly traded company governed by the Securities and Exchange Commission. Here's our case study. You've been asked to help a publicly traded company to secure their data. What is the value of their financial data? If you are an attorney, you can answer, it depends, or even if you're not an attorney, because that's the answer. The value of it depends on the time. The day before it's released publicly, it is extremely sensitive, and because it's not public, it needs to be contained. The day it's announced public, the value, the confidentiality value. Ooh, so remember CIA. What's the sensitivity, criticality looking at CIA? So when I was talking about financial data, confidentiality varies. What about integrity? Well, the integrity has to be consistent. Integrity then may be high. Availability. Availability then will depend, but once it's released public, I don't know, low, medium, or high. You tell me. So that's determine the data CIA security controls. Sometimes I get ahead of myself in the slides. And thank you, FRSecure, about, yes, privacy, personal information, great ideas and tips. Thank you for sharing those. Ooh, I did these out of order. So 3 general areas for data classification. It can be classified based on the content. So personally identifiable information, PHI, personal health information, CHD, card holder data, credit cards, debit cards, payment data, the CHD. Content-based is different than context. Web browsing. You are right now in a YouTube channel. If you're watching this video or live, that's the context. So how do we rank the CIA for this? You tell me. Again, I love hearing your ideas in chat. And then user-based. So you allow users to classify themselves. The danger with allowing user-based is that you'll get a variety of answers. Like right now, I would ask, what is the value of this broadcast? Well, let's be honest. If it stopped right now, life will go on. You can find similar content, although not nearly as good. You can find similar content other places. Hopefully you enjoy my humor. But understand, so how would you classify this? But I do want to dive into what are the most important types of data. Personal information, sometimes PI. It's called PI or personal information. Sometimes PI may be protected information as well. Information is priceless, cool, good. Personal, it's who, so personally identifiable information, who I am. Can you identify who I am? It's actually pretty easy. You see my name up on your screen. You could take a screen capture of me and do a reverse image search to confirm this is my identity. Maybe I should use a deepfake. Who you are. So where, remember, where is variable today. Right now, where are you? You should have at least two answers, your physical presence and your logical presence. Your logical very well could mean you're in many places. Like you're in this YouTube channel right now, but where is this being hosted? Where does Google host YouTube? Good question. Actually, it's probably very close to my house. There's 2 Google data centers within 20 miles of my house. So I don't know, it could be. Where you are, and then what you are doing. These are the potentially different areas of personally identifiable information. Your first name, last name, your postal address, account numbers, credit card numbers, bank numbers, driver's license number, passport number, IP address. So what are the specific data elements that are considered to be PII? What are the specific data elements that are considered to be PII? The answer? Of course, it depends. It depends where you are. EU has their distinct definition of PII. Here in the US, each US state has their own definition of PII. It gets very confusing. Know the general categorizations here. Okay, so let's go through a quick classification schema example. If you want to learn more about each of these, the book has more information on page 188. Again, the PDF version. In the interest of time, I've already been speaking for an hour and it feels like 10 minutes to me. These are general example categories. I would understand if you were studying for a certification exam like CISSP, know these general categories. It really will be based on the organization. The organization will set these in their data classification policy, okay? Some of these may overlap. Confidential and sensitive may overlap. You may see the word restricted in there. Private versus proprietary. Internal use only is another categorization. And then everything else is public. Now, keep in mind with this classification scheme, it's looking at the confidentiality of data, which actually reminds me of something. One other thing I want to mention about personal information. When looking at protection, it's mainly focused on confidentiality of personal information. Although GDPR, the EU regulation, does take integrity and availability into account. Privacy is mostly about confidentiality, while security is about all three. Okay, let's go through this. There are many other classifications possible. If you want more information on these, the session a year ago, class 3 from 2021, look through it, discussed a lot more in depth. I'm repeating this on purpose. Your classification schema should be documented in your organization's data classification policy. which may be included in a larger security policy, which is fine. I'd have to, yeah, approximately page 99 when, and again, I don't have the physical book. So if you have the physical book, put the chapter in, and you might want to designate that it's the physical. Pages approximately 188, around that area, the PDF version is where this is discussed. Okay, I mentioned difference between asset and data. Assets contain data. So the asset classification is often based on the data classification. I don't know if I mentioned this the previous session I taught here, but I'm prior US military officer. I was an intelligence officer. I actually had a very high security clearance way back a long time ago, but I did learn about data classification. So let's just say I'm finding something. Yeah, so I have a piece of paper here, and it has information on it. It has someone's social security, has my name and social security number on it. It really doesn't, pretend it does. I would classify this piece of paper. This piece of paper then is an asset. Or if a system has personally identifiable information and that is classified as confidential, then that system is classified as confidential and should be labeled as confidential. You need to label where you have your sensitive data. You need to label where you have your sensitive data. This way, if I lose this piece of paper, someone finds it, they will know if I label it, and I'll show you data labeling here in a moment. They will know what it contains. You also need to have a formal process for access approval as a part of this. So what does that mean? Before you can give access to an object, it should be determined what is its classification. Does the subject have a need to know that piece of information? Later on, when I talk, not later on tonight, but in a few weeks, I'll go into identity and access management. We'll go into this with identity and access management. You have a spreadsheet with very sensitive customer information on it. Their personally identifiable information. Does everyone in your organization need to see it? No. You would only give certain people based on least privilege, those who need access. When we talk about roles, that's where this comes into play. That's where I was mentioning these topics intermingle. So access requests approved by the owner. When we talk about data owner later on, this will become a little easier. The owner approves a subject. So a subject is a human, or it could be a system giving access to an object. It could be data, it could be another system. Look at the 2021 slides and video for more discussion about subjects versus objects. The book this time doesn't go into it in detail, but you will often see that term, a subject and an object. Subject is given access to an object. You are the subject given access to the object, this YouTube class. So the subject, what are the rules, requirements? Goes back to that security awareness stated in a security policy or a privacy policy are the rules. And then access are auditable. A common audit problem I've seen, an audit item, is that people have more access than they need to do their job, or they've maintained access after they've left a job. That's an auditable item. Often I've seen that be an audit deficiency, control deficiency. And then repudiation. I used repudiation in my session 2. So in chat, who can be the first to define repudiation? Go. It's one of these security terms you need to know. You will see it probably on the exam. I don't know what's going to be on your exam. I really don't. All I know is that it's a common term we use. Waiting to see if anyone has it in chat. More about this later. Again, we'll talk about it when provisioning. Yes, so Leon brought up in chat, access creep, permission creep, having more access than you need to do your job. Yes, keep yourself off the suspect list, only have access you need to do your job. So repudiation, you can't deny what you did. Thank you, ding, 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 denying the action. Thank you. Again, there's like a 20-second lag between when I say this and when I'm seeing it in chat. So data categorization. I want to keep making sure I move forward. So page 189, the PDF version of the book. Categorization is different than classification according to the book. I see it intermingling. I really wish they wouldn't get down to definitions so much. You might group types of comparable data based on its sensitivity, based on the classification, and have it categorized. Like PII is a categorization. The classification would be restricted data. So that's different examples of the difference. Oops. So information categorized based on what type of, what it is, its utility, its value. And the reason why you categorize is this way you can apply similar security controls. I asked earlier, do you need to secure everything the same way? The answer is no. If your public web server doesn't need to be secured the same as your cardholder database that may contain credit card data. You secure them, they could be very similar, but the list of controls to secure them most likely will be different. You want to have different security controls for each for improved efficiencies. You don't want to over-secure an environment, which causes a lot of end user headache and additional overhead. So having too much security can be bad, just like having not enough security, believe it or not. And I see that actually when I'm acting as a consultant and assessing organizations. So apply similar controls with similar areas. So again, cardholder database, cardholder data that has specific controls that are required, which will be different than other types. So that's the category. We'll talk about this. So when I talk about tailoring later on, so tailoring the security requirements, this will come back. Now, transitioning to asset classification. Before we're talking more data, now it's specific assets. An asset may have different value depending on how it's being used. The data on the system may not be worth much to anybody, but just having the system is. Let me give you an example. I was once working for an organization, and 5 years ago, they had a Windows 7 system that they were using to perform a critical function for the business. And yeah, they couldn't update it. It had an old application. And yes, I got it. Thank you. I'm getting there. So I just saw something in chat. Where was I? Windows 7 system, critical application, but it didn't have any PII on it. So availability was very important. So different level of security controls. Basically, they told me I need to speed up. So we already talked about some of this, different asset types. I want to bring up media. Media protection is its own area of concern. So make sure when you're looking at assets, you do take into account media. And again, I'll talk about that later. And where it seems like I'm going slower now, I'll be able to speed up later because I'll already have covered much of this, because you'll notice a lot of these topics in domain 2 overlap. So grouping those assets, relative level of sensitivity. This is why having the asset inventory is so important and why it's done with business. Okay, moving on. Let's practice real quick. And this is where I want your interactivity for those who are live in chat. And then if you're watching this on the video, take a moment to think about this. The FRSecure website. So I'm going to pick on them as our benefactors. What's the confidentiality of the FRSecure website? Would you rank it low, moderate, or high? So low, moderate, or high ranking for confidentiality. What do you think? The FRSecure website. I would rank it low in terms of, well, it's a public website. There's nothing sensitive on the FR that I could see quickly looking at it. Now, I did not do a scrape of their website. There could be something sensitive on it. I don't know. Generally, confidentiality is low. Integrity, though, I would say moderate. If something got changed, will it cause Evan and crew a headache? Yeah. But will the world come to an end? No. So it's moderate. Availability. Will FRSecure continue business if their website isn't working? Generally, yes. Again, I would rank that as moderate, looking at low, moderate, or high. I take a moment to go through that exercise because that is an example of an exam question you may see. Note the difference looking at an asset. So the asset being the FRSecure website, classifying differently based on confidentiality, integrity, and availability. I encourage you, so if you have so high availability, again, it depends. If FRSecure was depending on their website as a critical part of their business, knowing what I do about their business, though, if their public-facing website is not available for a couple of hours, people may not even notice. That's why I say moderate. Anyway, you determine for yourself. That's all part of this assessment, right? Okay, I need to keep moving forward. You can read in the book, Benefits of Classification. Pausing for a moment for those who like to read slides. Go and look this up in the book. Or if you're watching this on the recording, you can pause this if you need to watch it a little longer. Otherwise, I'm going to keep moving forward because I'm actually a little bit behind. I did want to show this. This is an example of actually a data inventory that can also be used for an asset inventory. Do you need to inventory everything? Again, no. Start with the highest value items. Your organization has a good idea what are the highest value items. It may come through with a business impact assessment performed with disaster recovery and business continuity. Remember last session when Ryan talked about business impact assessments and disaster recovery? So that's how you can determine business impact, BIA, business impact assessment. This is an example for you to understand a sample business impact assessment. A sample data inventory. Get ahead of myself sometimes. Sample data inventory worksheet showing, and it doesn't specify or have the specific data elements in it. It just says where it is. There are many tools you can use to automate this. I'll bring it up later. Other things associated with classification. Actually covered a lot of this. If you have questions, keep putting them up in the YouTube chat, or if you're watching this recording, use Slack. Let's go through a quick question, and then I really need to begin to rock and roll, or else I'm really going to be going late tonight. Thank you for the link. Yes, Snipe It. Great tool. Practice question. What type of data is not considered protected or private? A tip for taking tests, determine which ones are definitely not the answer. So not considered. Now, most likely you're not going to see a question like this. And I see most of you have this. Interest of time. Yes, a public Wi-Fi because it's public. The rest are protected. Either content or context. Remember that from before? Content, PHI, cardholder data, context, web browsing. All right, new topic. How do you know data or asset is important? How do you know something's important? Well, you figure that out through the risk assessment. That's why when Ryan talked about the risk management framework, helps determine value through understanding potential risks. Once you determine it, though, you'll use marking and labeling based on the classification. So literally, back in the old days, I'm showing my age, we would literally have stamps to label. Now, there's many other ways to label something. You apply the highest level of sensitivity until you can show that it's not sensitive, okay? Or you label it the highest level of sensitivity based on all of the data. So let's say, I'm gonna pull up the CISSP book. Let's just say I have a page in this book that has secret information. I would label this whole page as secret. Even if there was just one line in the page that is secret, the whole page is considered secret, which means this whole book is then secret, even if it just has one line in it and one page that is secret. That's how the military did it. Organizations may do it differently. You still have stamps. Awesome. This is the example. When you're reviewing organizations' documents, do they take time to actually put a label on it? Like this is from a pretend cleaning organization I created with fake data. But you can see this is potentially PII on it and health information and other information like loving chocolate. But it's labeled restricted use only based on the data classification policy. I'm going to repeat that. The label is based on the data classification policy. Where you are storing that data also should be labeled, whether it's removable media or cloud-based or a storage farm, SAN, NAS, what have you. It should be labeled as to the classification of the data within that device or system. Oh, so how do you protect it? So once you label, now you need to figure out how to handle it. So if we've transitioned into handling, physical security. I'm holding up a thumb drive right now. These get lost very easily. I was going to throw this over my shoulder, but then I accidentally break it and I don't want to break it. But they do get lost. If I was a better magician, I'd make it disappear. Physical security. If you lose physical security, basically anything else is lost. Even if this is encrypted. Given enough time, I can break encryption eventually. But you can also encrypt. Only store what you need. If you don't need it, don't store it. TJ Maxx parent company, had a cardholder data breach like 10 plus years ago because they kept storing people's credit card data just in case we need it. Don't do it. Backups. How are you backing up information? If that backup has sensitive information, then the backup needs to be protected through encryption and physical security. A phone, yes, a phone could potentially phone recordings. as an example. You're on a phone call and someone takes your credit card number over the phone, and that is recorded. How is that recorded? Protected. Okay, so that's storing of data. There's a lot more to each of these topics. I really wish, yeah, we had all night. We can't party all night here, so let's keep moving forward. Say I want to share information with you. So then we're going to declassify it. Or I want to use it for data aggregation, data modeling. There are many different ways to de-identify the data. So here's the official definition. I'm just looking through chat. Ah, yes, you're right, Dean, about potential violations. Declassification. You modify it so it's a lower level of sensitivity. I'm going to show you different ways to do it. You do it throughout the data lifecycle. Recall the data lifecycle from earlier. So when you're storing it, using it, sharing it. So say I want to share it with you. I shared with you a spreadsheet just a moment ago that was labeled. But if you notice, the data was all changed. I declassified it. What I want you to do is put when and where would you declassify data. If you're watching the recording, just think for yourself, or you can put it in chat. Declassifying changes the security requirements. For example, using a token instead of a credit card number changes the payment card industry data security standard requirements. Okay, so using a token, tokenization, I'll bring up in a moment. Well, the security requirements, I don't need to secure a spreadsheet that has been declassified to the same level I secure one that has top secret information or restricted information. That's the point here. How do you do this? Automate whenever possible. You can do it manually. How you declassify information is part of your data governance. So go back to domain 1. Can I explain about data aggregation? I see that question in the chat. Data aggregation is when you pull different parts of data together. Okay. So let's just say I have one spreadsheet with your first name and last name, and I have another spreadsheet with your last name and address. If I aggregate those, I then have personally identifiable information, because first name and last name may or may not be considered personally identifiable information, but first name, last name, and a postal address is most likely going to be considered PII. So in a nutshell, that's data aggregation. And that's understanding that is a danger with data protection. If I don't protect both of those pieces of the puzzle, and think of this as puzzle pieces, but if you're keeping those puzzle pieces separate, that actually is a security and data protection technique, separating data elements. It's not even mentioned in the book. Just thought of that. So data identification, I do recommend knowing this, and this is something new in this version of the book. This gets more into the data privacy aspects. Here's the official definition: removing information that can be used to identify a person, a human, an individual. Can you use it to protect other type of restricted information, business information? Yes. From the book, this is talking about private data. You can use the same techniques for business data. Oh, and then I didn't have this pop up correctly, but is this used for CI or A? De-identification is used for only confidentiality, protecting who will see that potentially sensitive data. There are multiple ways to de-identify data: masking, obfuscating, encrypting, and tokenizing. I'll show you examples. Obfuscating is also known as masking, by the way. And the idea, keeping data from being identified to identify an individual. It's a name like John Doe, PII. First name of John, generally no, depending on how unique of a name you have. Anyway, I got to be careful of going on too many tangents. All right, I already talked on that. Anonymization. Say that 3 times fast. Anonymization is a technique. And there are other techniques associated with anonymization. It's taking, you see this example from the book. Rather than having names of individuals with their grades, I use a specific non-attributable, easily identifiable number. So when you just see the column on the right, you see a number. Now you have to be careful. If the number on the right is the student number, and there's already a database attributing the name to the student number, then this is potentially not considered anonymized. But in general, if you look at the original data, Alice got an 85. If you look at the data on the right, column table on the right, you will see 661243 got an 85, somewhat anonymized. So it's changing of values to desensitize it. Masking, you see this with credit cards. Using X's instead of a credit card number, or just the last 4 of a credit card number. Often done with very sensitive data. Tokenization. And I know I got about half hour left and I got a lot more slides to get through, so we'll see how fast I can get through them. Otherwise, we may go a little bit over. Oh well. Substituting with some random value. Tokenization is often done with cardholder data. You have a link between the token and the personally identifiable information. They could be random numbers, one-way functions. You don't want to use sequential numbers. Why don't you want to use sequential numbers with a token? Well, if I know, I'm going to pick Jennifer is number 12 and I know Dean is number 13, then I can guess Isaiah is number 14, something like that. So you want to use more randomized for your tokens. So that way it can't be reverse engineered, deciphered. Here is an example I've used in other places. Give you a moment to look through this. The end user with their social security number and account number, Arthur Watkins. The data stored in the cloud, which may be accessible by others, as you can see, has a token instead. There's a token vault that is highly protected that provides the value, the true value that can, if you ever need to look up. So you have to protect that token vault like you would protect the original information. So let's practice with another question. This data de-identification technique is the process of altering personal identifiers in such a way that data subjects can no longer be identified directly or indirectly. Put your answer in chat. This technique, process, altering identifiers, subject can no longer be identified directly or indirectly. So for this, you may need to bring back the book. Yep. See, some of you didn't get this correct. It's anonymizing. With tokenization, you can still identify the person, but it's not personally identifiable information. They are identified with their token. That's the key, directly or indirectly. Tokenization is an indirect method. Anonymization does both. Again, if you have a question, post it. Okay, now to move to another new topic. Sorry, got to keep racing through. We have so much information to get through, so much good stuff. Hopefully you're pulling out nuggets from tonight. But some of this is a repeat, so I'm going to go through some of this pretty quick. Asset ownership, inventory, we kind of talked about. And then some of this, I'm going to kind of punt a little bit on configuration management and change management. Because configuration management and change management is in chapter 7. Inventory we already talked about. So let's go into some things that we haven't directly mentioned. I talked about owners a little bit earlier. The owner is part of governance. So go back to domain 1. Who is responsible, provides the oversight for both asset and data management. You could have a different data owner than the asset owner. Something I need to bring up, though, in terms of this oversight, quite famous quote in the world of information security from Dr. Eugene Spafford, who is an ISC squared fellow, by the way, so very well regarded in information security. He wrote in 1996, a long time ago, if you have responsibility for security, but have no authority to set rules or punish violators, your role is take the blame when something goes wrong. We call this the security figurehead syndrome. I have a paper from 20 years ago, an article talking about this. Have you ever been in this role where you have responsibility but no authority? I have. Didn't necessarily stay there very long. But the idea, responsibility and oversight to have that. So just for fun, yeah. If you are ever in this role, just point them to the CISSP study guide and say, you need the authority. Part of government. What are the responsibilities of an asset owner? Establishing the policy, enforcing the policy. Now, enforcement may be somewhat separate because of separation of duty. As we mentioned earlier, classifying data, classifying the asset, ensuring the asset inventory is completed. Access control as part of zero trust. Now, I'm not sure if how much we cover zero trust with this class. I haven't looked through everything in the book. Who or what should have access? What subjects should have access to what objects? That's all fundamental part of zero trust. What is acceptable use of the asset? All of these. So I would understand these responsibilities of the asset owner. There's a lot of responsibilities, rarely is it formalized. The more formal you make something, the more mature your organization will be. I love that from FRSecure, just put in chat, the risk acceptance form is your best friend. Yes, I agree. Repeat, deja vu all over again. Have an inventory. All right, I keep saying that. Inventory tools. You may ask, well, what can you use for inventory tools? I actually have this in a different presentation, but working with a business office, what do they have as their list of assets? Maybe working with, if you're using Azure directory services, Azure AD, domain system, domain servers, will often have the list of users and computers. Licenses, software licenses may have a list. My question is, are they all the same list? You can get information from endpoint management, a lot of places that may track assets. So part of what I've sometimes had to do is pull all of that together as part of inventory. I'm highlighting quickly shadow IT. If you allow people to purchase their own equipment, purchase their own assets that are used for corporate use, that is considered shadow IT. It's outside of the authority of information technology group. It's a common challenge I see with organizations with whom I work as a consultant. So that's why I bring this up and why this inventory will point out where they may have unauthorized assets. This creates a system of record. What is your system of record for your inventory? We already talked about asset inventory, so good. If you need me to repeat this, go hit the rewind button on the video and watch what I talked about like an hour and 15 minutes ago. It's repeated in the book. That's why I mentioned it again. How do you find that information? Well, some of this I just mentioned. Again, sometimes I get ahead of myself. Active Directory or LDAP, lightweight directory access protocol. Sometimes I forget ACRA. Yeah, directory access protocol. Should read my own screen. It's basically lists of assets. Could be between AD and LDAP. Nmap. Who can put in chat, be the first, what is the website for Nmap? It hasn't changed in 20 years. What is the website for Nmap? It's a tool you should keep in your security tool belt. I use this to see what systems are on my home network, to see which of my neighbors are trying to use my free Wi-Fi. And then I have all sorts of fun. No, Nmap is a good free tool for network mapping. There's other tools you can use. There's a lot of them. I mentioned software licensing. We'll talk about data loss prevention later on, but it often starts with an inventory. A CMDB, you're right, Jeremy. I think I bring up CMDB here momentarily when we talk about configuration management. Automate your asset inventory as much as possible. It's almost impossible to keep an asset inventory up to date manually unless you have a very small infrastructure. So still waiting. Did anyone come up with Nmap website, nmap.org? Okay. Just to remind you, if you have questions, you can put them either in Slack or this YouTube. You'll notice this asset lifecycle doesn't get talked about until quite a bit into the chapter. I would review again how assets are managed throughout this lifecycle. Starting out with the strategy, which is the requirements. May or may not design, procure, do you buy or build? An asset could be a piece of software. Do you design the software yourself or do you buy the software? Do you get it from GitHub? What about computer components? Don't forget of the dispose. I often see that's a challenge for some organizations, and I'll bring that up again here in a little bit. The book mentions about information technology asset management used for tracking ISO. I would know the different ISO, so International Standards Organization, their different standards, just the general nature of each, like 19770 is for asset management. 27001, information security. 27701, privacy. Knowing those generally. Jeremy brought up just a few seconds ago in chat about configuration management database may be used for your asset inventory. You want to use this as a way of managing configuration. So you may have noticed when I showed you an inventory sheet earlier, you will want to include specific elements, including versions, settings, baselines, if you have a certain level of patches. Recall the earlier discussion about the Center for Internet Security benchmarks. You may have in your configuration management database the benchmark level you are using, or the DoD Stig. All of this information is part of the inventory. Again, I would know about this, again, as a practitioner, and then if you are studying for a certification exam. Like I mentioned earlier for the ISO standards, knowing the different Nist special publications. So you see SP stands for special publication, and you'll often see SP 800. Those are the ones we focus on in information security. So they have a national checklist program. Again, just be familiar. Most likely, if it comes up as a test question, it'll be part of a larger concept. You may mention whether it's ISO or Nist. As I mentioned earlier, automate your inventory. One way to automate is using SCAP, Security Content Automation Protocol. This helps you automate your inventory. We go into configuration management again in domain 7. So that's why I'm going to move forward. Change management, also in domain 7. Organizations often struggle with this, though. You need a mature change process. I've seen as much self-inflicted denial of service happen within organizations because of immature change management. A sysadmin who doesn't have the oversight, hey, while I'm on this system making this change, I'm going to fix this too. But it's not in the change ticket. I know, but I'm here now and it's a small change. It won't affect anything, and the whole thing crashes. Have a mature change management process. That's the moral of this story. Needs oversight. Are all changes authorized? Do you enforce that whoever is making the change only makes the change that they are authorized to make? They follow a process, a checklist for making the change. They know how to roll it back. And then is it verified? For example, updating a server to the latest version. Someone else should go in and verify. Again, separation of duty. Thank you, Carl. Yes, change management, lots of hearts. And then documented. Document your changes. Often maybe within a ticketing system and within the configuration management database, because the configuration management database may show a specific version number. Well, if you just did an update, you need to make sure that version number is changed, that it is accurate. Software versioning can be, yes, it would be included with software inventory, because the version of software can be the difference whether it's vulnerable to an exploit or not. So that's where that can be very important. Okay, we're halfway through the slide, a little more over the half, but let me do a quick joke. I'll keep going. Yeah, this will probably go over 2 hours, but there's a lot to domain 2, a lot more than people originally thought. So knock, knock. Who's there? Noble or Nobel? Nobel who? Nobel just knocked. Quick, breathe. Next topic. I previously talked about data lifecycle, so I don't really need to go into this too much, but oops, went through that a little too fast. I don't think I'm going to spend a lot of time in this video talking about the different data roles. You can read about it in the book, read it in these slides. I would know the difference though, and I do have a sample test question. And then as far as these different steps within the life cycle, know what happens to data within each of these steps. So this is the review of the life cycle. Here's what I want you to do. If you're watching this as the recording, press pause. Write down what happens at each of these steps. How will you protect the data at each step? What happens with each step? Okay, now we can go through it. As I mentioned, the roles, I'm just going to quickly go through. You can read. The owner. This is often a business person. Could be a group. Often it's an individual, or if it's a group, it's still headed by an individual. How, why data should be used. I'm going to take a breath here. Why data is used. That's an critical part of data privacy. Purpose. Data's purpose needs to be documented as part of a privacy impact assessment. PIA, privacy impact assessment. The book doesn't really, as far as I can tell, at least in this chapter, go into privacy impact assessments. So just because I'm going through some of this quickly. So how the data is used, the purpose for the data. If you don't need to collect it, don't. How the data can be secured, the risk treatment, and you can read the rest. What is the classification? That data owner is the one ultimately responsible for classifying. And then communicates this, usually in the data classification policy. We do go into method of destruction in a moment. Repeat from session 2, due care versus due diligence. If you're not familiar with these terms, take a moment. Read them in the book. This was also the question that came up in Slack. Legal definitions. Basically, making sure you're taking the right steps. So it's the owner's responsibility for due care and due diligence. Other roles, and then there's the data controller that determines the purposes, that works with data processing. Reason why this is brought up is that GDPR differentiates a data controller from a data owner. So if you work with personal data within the EU or have any EU citizens that has personal data within your systems, you need to be familiar with this. So what level of privacy determined by the data controller? The custodian, think of it like the custodian for a building, you know, cleaning and mopping and maintenance. That's often similar to what systems and network administrators do today. It's very valuable. They keep the lights on, right? Without our maintenance personnel, they keep our systems running, but that's the data custodian. It's a role delegated. They're the ones who keep the data available. So as far as CIA, what do custodians mainly focus on? Availability. But they also touch on confidentiality, integrity. Now, a processor. They handle data on behalf of a data owner. If you study payment card industry data security standards, if you become a qualified security assessor, a QSA for PCI, has a distinct definition of a data processor. Why I bring it up. So their role, again, if you're not familiar with this, a comptroller is totally different. But if you look on page 220 in the book, you will see the different overlap. We talked earlier, the subject, the controller, how they fit with this. So I would know the difference in these roles. And then there's the users. They're the ones who consume the data. And then defined by GDPR, a data subject. Can a data user also be a data subject? Yes. I'm consuming data, but I'm also the subject of the data. Your YouTube has collected, Google collected my information. And thank you for those who are putting in the hard copy text numbers. So let's do a quick question, just to keep you on your toes. And thank you all for sticking with me. And again, I know these become long, and that's why the video is so valuable. You can press pause, come back. This role maintains the protection of data according to the information classification. This role maintains the protection of data according to the information classification. And I went through this so quickly, so I'm just going to give you the answer. This is the data custodian, which is more associated with cybersecurity, the technical aspects, the IT group. If you have questions, you can, well, we're almost going to run out of time here on the YouTube live, so put them in Slack. I'm just going to skip this one. Collection. Reason why I bring this up, how do you get the data on your systems to begin with? It seems odd the book, after we've been talking about data for so long, now goes into data collection. How is data particularly most sensitive? So your restricted data, your personally identifiable information. You want to make sure as you are collecting it, you build security and privacy in. Only collect the information you need for the purpose. Only collect the information you need for the purpose, and the data owner sets the purpose. I repeat that because it's such a fundamental concept. GDPR has the collection limitation principle. It's often where I see organizations. If you have other questions in chat, that's what I mean, Patty, as you have questions. I don't have time to cover this. If you want to know more, hit me up. I actually have a LinkedIn Learning class, brand new, on the privacy framework, not covered in the book. These are the privacy by design 7 foundational principles. Take a moment, look at these and see how they overlap with information security. And you'll see they very much do. That's why I bring it up. You can learn more at the link on the bottom of the screen. And in the PDF version of the slides, each of the links are clickable. I would take some time to learn this as a professional and studying for an exam. These are very much fundamental security and privacy principles. And I have a typo. Ooh. I got tired while creating slides last night. So why is the data? We already talked about this. Documenting the data's purpose. The data owner documents the purpose. And then having an inventory. Earlier, I mentioned the map. Having a network diagram and a data map. Knowing where the data is physically and virtually. Looking at the life cycle, that use phase, maintenance. So this is something relatively new to CISSP study, is what we're seeing here, which is why I'm slowing down. I know we've been going for about 2 hours. I'm gonna finish up here. Yeah. So just letting people know. Don't worry, I'm gonna get through domain 2. It just might take a little longer. This is something new. This is privacy. If you look at the privacy framework, maintaining data, data accuracy, do end users, data subjects have the capability of fixing inaccurate data? is a data privacy issue affecting cybersecurity now. Wherever the data may be used, making sure appropriate security is in place. So whether it's being aggregated, so pulled together, whether it's being analyzed, whether it's being processed, there is this balance. Again, over-securing, so functionality. So that's the data maintenance. Data retention is something you'll work with your legal department. When I worked for TD Ameritrade, I spent a lot of time with the TD Ameritrade lawyers on data retention because there are laws. For example, in the US banking, financial data needs to be kept for at least 7 years. For some requirements, it's set by business owners, determined by policy. When do you keep data for longer than you need to? Well, that's up to the business. But generally, here's the rule on data retention, not on the slide. So the rule for data retention: keep data only as long as you need it, as determined by the business, and then delete it, destroy it. Don't keep things around if you don't need it. That's where you can get in trouble. Plus, there's cost, there's overhead for storing terabytes of data that maybe you don't need. The less data you have, the less damaging. Or this actually gets into the legal part. Let's just say you are being sued and they want you to disclose data. If you've destroyed it per your policy, that data is gone. They just deleted it just to get away with the lawsuit. Nope, it's in our policy. We always delete data after 7 years and 1 week. I've dealt with that as a cybersecurity professional, why I bring it up. Some of you have been talking about data destruction and remnants already in the chat. So destroying the data, knowing different methods for destroying data. What is left over? So for example, I have a thumb drive. I take a hammer to it and I break it up into 100 different pieces. There are some that might be able to put that puzzle back together to recreate it. That's remnant. Or they just find a little piece. Thumb drives don't work as well. CDs are a really good example. And this is an old CISSP CD, ironically enough. I could break this CD into 20 pieces, but there's still remnant data on that little piece of CD that could be still read. That's the example. So are you leaving remnants of data? So you want to make sure it is completely destroyed. You may need a certificate of destruction. There are companies in most major metropolitan areas that will destroy computer systems for you and then give you that certificate. And that way, if someone asked, was it properly and adequately destroyed? Yes, I have my proof. Here's my certification. The question though, how do you destroy data in the cloud? How do you ensure there's no remnants with cloud service providers? I'll leave that up to you to think about and ponder, because that can be a challenge. Often a cloud service provider will automatically duplicate data across multiple data centers. That's why knowing the location of those data centers, maybe keeping it within a specific area like a country, getting some type of certification from your cloud service provider that it's destroyed. So yes, good point, Bob. Destruction level is determined by the classification level. Generally, yes. So if it's confidential data, personally identifiable data, then yes, it needs to be destroyed differently than public data. You can read in the book different laws regarding data destruction. I don't like spending a lot of time on the video going into these because they tend to be location specific. Know the law for your area. As I mentioned, data destruction determined by law and data classification. The 2021 Class 3 goes into this a lot more detail. Kind of figured I'd be running out of time by this point as I was creating the slides. A lot of information on these different techniques. For your exam, do take time to know the differences between overwriting, degaussing. If you encrypt it, you destroy the encryption key using symmetric encryption. You destroy the key, potentially makes the data unreadable. So, and if you're not sure what I just said regarding encryption, stay tuned. Encryption is coming up in a future class, it may even be Wednesday. Okay, so last little piece here. And again, interest of time, sorry. Knowing, why do you retain data? Why do you retain data? And if you don't need to keep it, don't. This slide, and then is from the book, it explains different reasons you might need to, for evidence, for forensics, intellectual property, the other IP. One thing I noted while I was reading this is that data retention is different than asset retention. You may get rid of data very quickly. For example, cardholder data, you might just keep very temporarily and then automatically remove it. The asset that is used, the server that is used, could be in place for many years. So know the difference. Data will have a different life cycle than the device or asset on which it may reside. The part I wanted to mention with this, establishing the responsibility. GDPR does require establishing a data protection officer. So you can read the book more about this. And I've primarily covered a lot of this. So defining the retention limits. Oh yeah, and then in the book, don't forget your IT audit logs. How long do you have an auditing strategy? I've worked for organizations where we have our auditing and logging strategy. Keeping audit logs can be very expensive, especially if you're using a security incident and event management system, SIEM or SIM. How long do you keep IT audit logs? Keep in mind, you may be losing forensics evidence if you destroy audit logs. The audit logs themselves may have a specific classification or categorization level. From the GDPR, individuals in the EU can go and say, erase me. So if we have anyone from the EU here and you say, I don't want to be shown that I was in chat. I don't know how YouTube does that, to be honest. That's not my problem, but that is a right according to EU. So that right to be forgotten. Hit me up outside and I'll talk to you about a lot of today's privacy principles were written in the 1890s by a judge named Louis Brandeis. The big note here, talk to your lawyers in your organization. Find data privacy lawyers. It's a specialty. Other considerations regarding records retention. If you don't need it, don't keep it. And I've already covered most of this. Okay, now the last. I think this is the last. Might be the second to last. And I went slower in the beginning. I should have gone a little faster, but there's a lot to cover. These are the topics in this section, and this is the last section, by the way. I'm going to only quickly go through the data states. Hopefully that should be familiar with you. I briefly talked earlier about scoping and tailoring. I do want to spend a little time with that. Standards, I'm just going to give you the reference because we've already talked to some of them. And then data protection will be talked about more throughout this course series. Let's dive in. Controls. So a control is a way to protect assets or data. Okay? And they vary based on that classification. And the book repeats itself because it's so important. That's why I repeat it. You don't need to secure everything the exact same way across an infrastructure based on the value and classification. So you need to select the different types of controls. Now, if you recall, Ryan spoke about these different types: technical, administrative, and physical controls. Think about it: people, process, and technology. So technical, technology. Administrative are more process. Physical, something you can touch: a USB drive, a heart-shaped squeegee toy. I like toys around my desk, so. Give you a moment. This note comes directly from the book. So technical is about hardware, software. Administrative is the behavior of humans. Physical, anything that moves. So you can see where else this is discussed. As I mentioned, I'm going to quickly go through the different data states. Think about how to protect data while it's in each of these states. So at rest, meaning it's being stored somewhere, even temporarily, in motion across a network, in use while someone, a human, is using it. The book talks about different protection techniques, but doesn't really go into detail. Later on, we'll go into different access controls. In fact, that, I believe, domain 4 coming up, if I have my domains correctly. I can bring it up here. No, domain 5 is identity and access management. So we'll talk about access control, for example. Encryption. Encryption is your friend for data at rest and data in motion in transit. This shows different methods for it. TPM, if you're running Windows 7, TPM is required, right? So this way it automatically encrypts the hard drives. This way my laptop gets lost or stolen. I don't have to worry about my PII I store on my laptop because someone that finds that hard drive won't be able to decrypt it without the key. And thank you, Ryan. Ryan put something in chat, personal chat for me. Data in transit. Transport layer security. When you go into network security, we'll talk more about this. This is the HTTPS. What it does is it takes plain text, put it into ciphertext along from the client to the server. Okay. I need to mention this because it's so many people don't always understand this. HTTPS, the S stands for secure, but not really. What it does it mean? It means the traffic is encrypted and there's a certificate in use for the website. It does not mean the website is secure. It means the network is encrypted or secured. Sorry, I needed to bring that up. Other ways to protect networks, data in transit, of course, a VPN. We'll talk more about VPNs in a future session. Do know the different types of VPNs. Let's see. Link encryption at each routing point. I would know each of these differences, and then end to end. So if I use a tool to encrypt this slide deck and I send it to you and it's password protected using the advanced encryption standard AES, that's end to end. You can use and should use multiple. Data in use, don't forget this. It's often the hardest because how do you protect data while it's within a processor or while it's within random access memory? So encryption may not work for data in use because that means a human needs to view it. Access control then may be one of the primary protection mechanisms. Okay, scoping and tailoring. These are not synonymous, so do know how they work together to build your configuration baseline. So very early on tonight, or whenever you're watching this, we talked about benchmarks, baselines. We said the Center for Internet Security benchmark or security technical implementation guides, the STIGs from US DoD, those create baselines. You may have your own gold standard baseline. What you will do, though, is you will scope. So this is your organization's process to determine what security controls apply and what assets they apply to. Again, you don't need to use all security controls. So you scope it, you set the scope, what are the systems, and then you tailor the list of controls. If you look at Nist Special Publication 800-53, Rev 5, Revision 5 is the most current as of when I record this in 2022. It just came out. They spent like 3 years getting Rev 5. Do take time to look at Nist 800-53. It is a very comprehensive list of controls. They list almost any control, but then they categorize them low, moderate, or high. That's where this comes in. As part of the Nist risk management framework, the Nist RMF, one of those steps is scoping and tailoring. You determine which controls apply, and then you assess against those controls. So you may just determine that the system is at a moderate level, but you may not even select all of the moderate controls. It's part of the business decision process. It's part of the risk management framework. This is the figure from the book, PDF version 246. If you have the hard copy, please put the page number in chat for those who are following along. Thank you. And thank you for the folks who are sticking with me. Getting close to the end. Do look at the note at the bottom left of the screen that convenience is not a factor, although cost can be. If it is too costly for your organization to apply a control, you can determine that is an acceptable risk and you're not going to comply with it. That is one I often have conversations about with IT audit staff. We will talk more. So I see the word RBAC, Role-based access control, sometimes known as rule-based, and then there's also rule-based access control. They both can be called RBAC. When I talk about domain 5, identity access management, we'll go through RBAC. Stay tuned. Anyway, you can change your baseline based on your business need, but you'll leverage, and I do this for many of my consulting clients, leveraging Nist 800-53. I have multiple definitions in the slides on compensating controls. It's just doing something different. For example, thank you. Someone said you're stellar. I appreciate that. That helps keep me and my energy going when I hear those and see those little comments. So thank you. And thank you for those putting the page numbers of the physical book in here. Sorry, going back, giving you a moment to read compensating controls. I would know the definition not only for CISSP, but for the ISACA certification, CISA, CISM, and many others. For example, I can't patch. I have an application that if I try patching, it'll break my application. But my policy says I have to patch. What do I do? Use compensating controls. Limit access on the network, on the system, on the application. Limit functionality. You are allowed to use compensating controls. But let me show you, and I show you the payment card industry, their definition, because if you're using cardholder data, I really like what the payment card industry has to say about compensating controls. And I've applied this even for other types of data. It needs to meet both the intent and rigor of the originally stated requirement. Similar level of defense. Be above and beyond. And be commensurate with any additional risk. Really good points here. If you are an IT auditor and someone provides you with a compensating control, I would leverage this even if I'm not using and looking at cardholder data, because this actually provides good requirements. How you can allow other types of protection. So as you are learning about more security protections, think about multiple ways. There's always many ways to secure an asset. All right, let's go through a practice question real quick. For those who are still with me live, and if you're watching the video, this just gives you an opportunity. And I do read the questions just to help you understand them. Some people are more auditory. So this is the process of modifying the set of controls to meet the specific characteristics and requirements of the organization. Ooh. So I showed this on a slide. So you can go back to the slides. This is tailoring. So you tailor the controls for your organization. You'll take Nist 800-53 and determine which ones of the controls. I can spend an hour, 2 hours solely talking about Nist 800-53 easily. Okay, so other frameworks, you can read about these in the book. Go back to see slide 25 where I talk about the Nist cybersecurity framework. I would be familiar with these for CISSP. Just giving you a moment to process what's on the slide. There's the UK version of it for those in the UK. I mentioned this earlier. So many organizations now are using Nist. It's free. Why not use Nist? The only time Nist is not available, the only time I've seen it was in December of 2018 when we had a US government shutdown. I know they took away Nist. Why? I don't know. There's nothing. Yeah, they're just being silly. Sorry. Security standards. This is the list of controls. look through the table of contents of 800-53 Rev 5. Now, there are two other supplementary documents for 800-53. There's 800-53A, latest version of Rev 5. Book is a little bit dated, of course, still talking about Rev 4. Look at the current version, Rev 5. The link works here. What A does is it tells you how to assess. So A for assessing. B is for tailoring. So in the interest of time, I won't spend time on that. The different US information processing standards, again, be familiar with what they are. I did want to provide you with the ISO. Now, International Standards Organization, the ISO/IEC 2700X, so 27001, 002, and 005. 5 is risk management, are the primary ones. There is a new version for 2022 of 27002. This is the list of security controls. 27001 is just very high level how to set an information security management system, ISMS, information security management system. Won't go there, William. I took this from the table of contents from ISO 27002 2022 version. Note, I'm going to go back. ISO is it copyrighted, copywritten? I think it's copywritten. Oh, well. You have to buy it. Let's put it that way. But you can look at the table of contents for free. I show you this so you can see these are all of the other protection mechanisms we haven't even covered yet through this class. So yet to come. But if you're looking for a list, just the list, if you purchase 27002, you can go and see the details for each of these. But I like to show this just to show the wide scope of controls that are possible. The last bit here gets into how to protect data. Again, interest of time, and I'm slowly beginning to run out of steam. Can you believe it after 2.5 hours? Understanding digital rights management. There's a lot of debate about this, how it should be handled. I would know about DLP though. DLP is a common technique and tool used to prevent data from being lost, leaked. There's a lot of other information about it. The book has 3 whole pages. Maybe at a future time, if we ever have enough time in this class, we can spend more on it, more time on this. So it's both technologies and practices. It can be done at multiple layers. And the book goes into the different layers, ways to incorporate it. The whole idea is to prevent data from accidentally being disclosed. Most financial breaches happen because of data leakage. That comes from the Verizon Data Breach Report 2021. Having a DLP solution. So if you're using Outlook for Microsoft 365, it'll probably have DLP built in depending on your version. So basically, I'm trying to send an email that contains known PII. It'll automatically say, nope, you're not allowed to say it. It'll block it. You can see this, I took from another slide deck that I have, shows how it can be used from the end users to make sure through your policy that you're not going to accidentally through a website or email. I do want to talk briefly about these core stages. So the discovery, data discovery is often a challenge for organizations. Remember earlier, I asked, do you know where your data is? I've talked with other consultants. It's often a challenge because it can be in databases, it can be in flat files stored within people's email. So that discovery, and then you classify it. These tools can help, the DLP. Then monitoring. So monitoring to see where is it going? Is it being put somewhere that's not protected as it should be? And then enforcing, as I mentioned, trying to send an email or trying to post something on a file share that I shouldn't, should give a warning. And you can see the difference between DLP at rest, so wherever data is stored. Maybe your DLP is in line, part of your firewall system, next generation firewall, or unified threat management system, new name for a firewall. To be able to see network as it's being, or traffic as it's being transmitted, data as it's being transmitted, to see if it's potential PII. And then on hosts, with so many people working remotely, you may have an application, a client on each endpoint to look for DLP. And thank you again for your comments. Book talks about cloud access service security brokers. It seems odd that they get into cloud here before we really talk about cloud. Interest of time, sorry, I'm just not going to spend time on this. When we talk about cloud, hopefully we'll spend more time on this. But it's basically another way to look at data security through the cloud. Different types of access security brokers, CISSPs. When we talk about network protection, we'll talk about proxy. So think about a proxy just does a handoff. So something in between. Forward resides on the endpoints, while reverse more on the servers. So we'll hopefully have time to talk about this in a future class. One I did want to mention to you, not mentioned in the book, but when I'm talking about data protection in other classes, I'll bring this up. Integrity checking. All of the other was about DLP is mostly about confidentiality. What about changing of data? There are tools known as FIM, F-I-M, File Integrity Monitoring Tools. Tripwire is a well-known example. Tripwire has been around for a very long time that looks at files and lets you know if a file has changed using an encryption technique known as hashing. And when we talk about encryption in a future class, we'll talk about a hash. A hash just creates like a fingerprint, a unique value. So file integrity monitoring will let you know if a file is changed. So if I want to make sure the integrity of something remains intact, I will use a FIM. It can be used with change management. So if something changes that has not been authorized, I can look, is there a change ticket associated with it? There's something I would consider, even though this is one of those things, not at least in this chapter, I would still know this for an exam. Okay, we made it through domain 2. Thank you all for everyone who is still here hanging with me. I know a number of you had to drop off, but you'll catch up on the video and you can fast forward. That's the nice thing about the video. Hopefully for those who are still hanging with me, you're finding the value with this. Here's all that we talked about in domain 2. It is really pretty broad. I rocketed through a lot of these topics too. If you have questions, use Slack. Share your questions. Next session is on Wednesday, 27th of April, domain 3, security architecture and engineering. Ryan will be leading that one. These are the different topics. Lot to cover. Ryan will probably go 2.5 hours on Wednesday just because there's a lot to cover. Homework, review domain 2, read domain 3 for Wednesday. Be familiar with what Ryan will be talking about. Keep taking practice exams. Seriously, I can't recommend enough. Take a lot of practice tests. That way you get comfortable with how they ask questions, how to determine what is the best answer. Review at least 2 of the resources we provided. So the Cybersecurity Framework, Privacy Framework, 800-53, Center for Internet Security. Post one question or answer a question in the Slack channel. And then I will see you on Wednesday. This is me, just to remind you in case you forgot. So I'm Ron Werner. I am your mentor leader for this session. This has been session 4, class number 4 of the FRSecure. Hit me up on LinkedIn. Love meeting new people. And until we chat again, I'll be back for domain 5 to talk about identity and access control. But until then, go out, keep learning, and be safe.